Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloane Freemont and I'm your host. So how many of you listening are worried about money these days? Maybe 2020 got you looking at things and you found out that what we've been told about money, about building wealth, about the banking system and how it works isn't exactly what we thought or what we've been told over the years. And I know a lot of these kinds of questions aren't actually socially acceptable. And maybe if you've asked them, you've been called a conspiracy theorist or something worse. But today we're going to get into that, and we're going to get to the bottom of some of these questions. My guest today is Tim Picciott, and he's known as a LibertyAdvisor. Tim is a trailblazer in the field of crypto wealth management, and he has an amazing story to tell about being true to his beliefs and finding his niche and finding his way with clients and utilizing advanced financial planning solutions. Tim's website actually says, congratulations on finding one of the only financial advisors that has taken the red pill, which is exactly what drew me to him. So if you're red pilled, you know the Federal Reserve isn't actually federal or a reserve. If you're aware of the Great Reset and you're looking for alternative ways to preserve assets, such as crypto, this episode is for you. Tim, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this conversation. Everything that your background, your history, what you do is, I love your story. So let's start out a little bit, having you tell us about yourself and how you became known as a LibertyAdvisor.
Yeah, so in 2008, dating myself here, I was graduating college and I took a class on the Federal Reserve and we won the national competition. Just to be clear, I was the only person in my class that wasn't on this competition because I was busy doing water polo and other stuff. And it was just a bunch of nerds going to New York City every weekend. And I didn't really feel like doing that. But anyways, my classmates, they won the national competition against Harvard, Yale, MIT. And I thought I knew a lot about the Federal Reserve. Like the first guy that I trained underneath as a CFP, he had been on that same class like 4 years before and he had won the national competition. So I thought I was in a pretty good position to know what's going on. And while I was in that class, it actually the class saying was in Fed we trust, instead of like in God we trust. I mean, that should have been the first clue right there. But as I graduate, everything starts going to hell in a handbasket. My first day on the job, Lehman Brothers collapses. And I was told this whole time that like the Federal Reserve was basically God and they've got everything under control and don't worry about anything. And like day one, literally everything just, completely, that's when 2008 collapse started. So that got me looking into everything, trying to reverse engineer the collapse and all these guys. Like I initially wanted to work for these big banks and wanted to work for Goldman Sachs and like looked up to all of them. And then I started reverse engineering how all this went down and figured out that they were pretty much the ones, like the big banks are the ones who basically caused all this stuff. And then one day I was in a hot tub with a client and his wife's friend or something. And then all of a sudden, their husband, and all of a sudden, this guy who looks like Rob Zombie, looks like he's homeless. And my client was a doctor, so I'm not hanging out with like homeless looking people. But he starts telling me the Federal Reserve is private, and I'm like, "You're full of crap. There's no way it's private." And he tells me to look into this documentary called "From Freedom to Fascism." So I, watched that, and then that starts getting me down this rabbit hole, and I start researching, and then find out that I was wrong. And I was like, "Well, how could I be wrong in this when I was on the national class to win a national competition on this?" I had a Series 7 stockbroker's license, a Series 66, had my life hacks and health, was on my way to becoming one of the youngest certified financial planners probably like in the world. And I'm like, how, if I didn't know this, like who the hell else doesn't know this? Because I was in the prime position to know that. And I like being right on things and, an Italian New Yorker. So I don't want to admit that I'm wrong. And then, so it really pissed me off that I realized that I was sort of duped on this. And then my girlfriend at the time happened to buy me the book Creature from Jekyll Island, which she just randomly asked somebody in the bookstore what to get on the Federal Reserve. And they actually told her not to get that. And she got it. I didn't even know the book existed. And I've got a signed copy of it just like 5 feet in front of me. And essentially that book sort of was like the blueprint for, a lot of what's going on. And, then it also helped me kind of understand the whole kind of climate change. At the time, I think it was still branded as global warming. How that was sort of like a hustle to eventually get a carbon tax. And I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't care about the environment. I'm not trying to burn tires, but I mean, there's a financial, and that's a whole nother podcast on the, going green and the whole like ESG movement and like the underlying funds of that. But anyway, so then this all led me to, I was trying to think to myself, okay, well, are there any politicians that are trying to do something about this? And then I discovered Dr. Ron Paul. Then I moved out to Phoenix, Arizona, which was sort of like the birthplace of the Ron Paul revolution. You had the first Ron Paul meetup group in America was formed here, and actually, like, one of the guys that formed that now is one of the January 6th people who got charged with seditious conspiracy like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. But there was a lot of activism going on here, and I obviously a lot more than New York. And so I moved out of New York as quick as I could. And I sort of did things a little bit backwards, because most people found out about Dr. Ron Paul, then found out about the Fed, and I found out about the Fed, then found out about him. And then now, because of him and G. Edward Griffin and all these other trailblazers, probably tens of millions of people have woken up to this. So it's a lot different today than it was in 2009, 2008. There's tens of millions of people worldwide that sort of know what's going on or have an idea of what's going on. And unfortunately, then the system uses that to then like divert them into like the wrong sort of solution. That's a whole nother topic in and of itself.
Yeah.
But that's how I got into the role as a Liberty advisor. And actually, originally I was a Libertarian advisor, and then the Libertarian Party really pissed me off. And basically, you had the Bill Weld, who was the vice presidential candidate, big rhino Republican guy. He was talking against guns, and then I'm like, if you got the the vice presidential candidate talking about guns, I mean, it might as well be the Democratic Party. And so I basically left that. Then I came back in 2020, was a delegate for the party. But anyways, I switched my name to Liberty because I thought that was more of, I didn't want to get people get confused and think I was part of like the Libertarian Party,
Right.
even though there's people in there and there's segments and factions in there that are doing good things, but it's all pretty much a waste of time. Like,
yeah, I agree. Both wings of the same bird, so to speak. And so this topic we're talking about today with the financial system and kind of what you came to realize, it's such a big topic and we can go in so many different directions, but I want to clarify before we go on, when you talk about, and it's interesting how you came to know this, right? This random man who wasn't wearing a suit and a tie, right? Is some guy that you said looked homeless in the hot tub you were in, told you to look this up about the Federal Reserve. And it's like, wait a minute, what? Like, it's like the whole thing is like this paradigm, or like the curtain fell, right? And you saw it for what it was. So, but before we go on, let's talk about when we say this and we talk about maybe for people who aren't familiar with what the Federal Reserve is or isn't, can we just briefly touch on that before we move on?
Yeah, so I think the biggest part of the scam that people need to understand, besides the fact that it's not federal and it doesn't reserve anything, and then you got the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is actually a bank, then the World Bank is actually a fund, and everything is always twisted upside down. But let's say there's 3 people on an island, and then we're the only 3 people in our community, in the world, so to speak, and I want to be the banker, and you want to be a podcast host, and you want to borrow money from me, the banker, and let's say you want to borrow $100. Now, this is the only $100 that exists on the island. I created up out of thin air. I lend you the $100 and say, okay, Sloane, I need this back next year at 3% interest. Well, that means you have to give me back $103 next year. Well, how do you give me $103 if only $100 exists on the island? Well, then you've got to then borrow more money. And so essentially the biggest revelation is that our money is backed by debt. And so in order to get, I shouldn't say like our money, but the currency that we use is a better way to put it. The currency that we use is backed by debt. So the Federal Reserve has to issue treasury bills, bonds, notes. They have to issue debt, and that debt is, promulgated out into society in the terms of like dollar bills, digital dollars. And actually just last week, the Fed came out with a 40-page policy paper on having a central bank digital currency, which that could be its own topic in and of itself.
Yeah,
so all these little rabbit holes could be its own little topic. But essentially the scam is the fact that we need to borrow money from people that never had it to begin with, and then they get to keep 6% interest of all the interest of all the debt. You can find that on federalreserve.gov's own website. And it's basically a gigantic scam. And essentially it's high-tech slavery. And then you can get into the whole story of how they went down there underneath fake names in 1911 to this Jekyll Island, which was JP Morgan had a big estate down there, along with some of the other richest people in the world. I was actually there in 2020 at the Red Pill conference that G. Edward Griffin was speaking at, and actually drove there so I could avoid wearing a mask. And it's just absolutely insane that and what is going on now. And actually this is just about to end in 2 months, which is depending on when this episode comes out. There's obviously a lot of stock market turmoil going on and financial market turmoil. And a lot of that is because in March, the Fed's going to stop printing bonds, and basically they're going to stop buying more bonds. And for the past, pretty much since 2008. They've been the only game in town doing that. And so it's going to be a big paradigm shift when they go from buying $120 billion of bonds a month to zero. Now they're tapering it down like $30 billion a month. But anyways, it's a big shift, but they get to take, right now they're buying mortgages. So they've got essentially they're owning homes from which they never had the money to begin with. So private bankers now own a vast majority of like the new mortgages that are created, but they never had that money to begin with. And this has always been talked about, whether it's, going back to, Benjamin Franklin said, if we allow private central banks to issue the currency and credit of our nation, we're going to be homeless on the continent our forefathers conquered. I mean, it's a paraphrase of it. But then you've also had people like Abraham Lincoln said, I have an army in front of me. That's the South. And I have an army of European bankers at my rear, and I far more fear the army at my rear. And actually, the story kind of even gets deeper than even the Federal Reserve. So then, if you take things back to even like the Napoleonic War, essentially you had what was the Bauer family teamed up with Oppenheimer family, and the Bauers used to be goldsmiths, and then the Oppenheimers were like, well, hey, instead of lending money to every Tom, Dick, and Harry, why don't you lend money out to governments? And so then they started. So their shield on their door was a red shield. Red shield in German is Rothschild. That's the Rothschild family. That's how they got their name. So I mean, that's not even like the real name. It was Bauer. And then you had a German prince who wanted to buy a bunch of English bonds as the Napoleonic War is going down. They took all this money from the German prince, never bought into the English bonds. They found out that basically that Napoleon had lost the war. They spread a rumor saying Napoleon had won the war. It brought the British stock market down to zero. They came in with all the money that they had from that German prince, bought up basically the entire British stock market. Then, and this is all mainland history, like anybody that thinks this is crazy can just go back and look this up themselves.
Right.
And then they basically then owned pretty much the entire British economy, started the Bank of England, then basically married into the royal family, which their real name isn't really Windsor, it's Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, and that's a whole nother story too. But there's this whole and then they had 6 sons, and all their 6 sons to like all the major banking powerhouses in Europe, whether it was, Frankfurt or Vienna, and, all the different banking establishments. And then their main man in America, their agent here was Alexander Hamilton. And it's no, I think, accident that he's the one that's deified, has a Broadway play. And, you don't see, Broadway plays for too many other people out there, because he was their main guy. And then they had a first central bank in America that ended in 1812. That's why the British came here and burned down the White House, not for whatever the textbook says they did, because the British openly owned it. So they didn't care that, America was free. It's because they were the ones who controlled the money. And that's why the head of the Rothschild family says, I care not who makes the laws. I care who controls the money, and I control the money. Then the second central bank of America ended. It was around like 1837-ish. And that was when Andrew Jackson, said, you guys are in the den of eternal vipers, and by eternal God, I shall rout you out. And then to be assassinated twice, both guns misfired point blank. The guy who did it said he was put up to it by wealthy European bankers. And then now it's sort of a big FU to Andrew Jackson. They then put him on the $20 bill, which is like one of the most widely used bills there are. So like, this is what he was railing against. And then they put him on the face of it. And then the third iteration would be what we call it, the Federal Reserve. And then, but there's been 2 others. Those 2 have failed. This one now is failing. And the plan is to eventually get a central bank digital currency, which the Fed did launch a 40-page paper last week. And it's been sort of one of the main things I've been warning against is basically people accepting and being bamboozled into this central bank currency. And also the other thing I was warning about was the time period when the Fed had to start raising rates, not because they wanted to, but because there was actually inflation that they couldn't hide, and they were forced to. And it's sort of now crazy that both of these things are sort of coalescing together basically right now. So
yeah, so I want to touch on a couple of things, because you said so many things there, and I know there's just so many ways we can go with this, because there's so much to say about it. It's such a big topic and so many rabbit holes off of it. But I was watching the movie series Zeitgeist. Have you seen that? I'm sure you have. And
yeah, a while ago.
Yeah, I watched it again. I was watching the one where it was talking about with the banking, with the fractional reserve lending. Is that what it's called? Where again, what you were talking about when they create the money and then what they do, what the banks do and how they multiply that. And they showed on the screen, and unless you can explain that better than I can, but I just want to touch on that before we move on to the central bank digital currency, because I think that's so important for people to understand the banking process. Like, it's not just the Federal Reserve, it's all the other banks and what they do with that money that comes, and how that's shown on the balance sheet. So can you explain that a little bit? And I don't know if I have the term right. Is it fractional reserve lending? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's fractional
percentage
reserve banking.
banking.
Fractional,
Okay.
yeah.
So can you explain that a little bit?
So if you lend the bank $100, then basically they can sort of like lever that up, basically 10 times. And so then all of a sudden, they get to lend out $1,000 based off of your 100. And so if you go to the
Even though
bank
they
and
don't have the $1,000 in reserves.
yeah, so they don't have the money in reserves. And so that's, sort of like the whole, one of the biggest parts of scam is the fact that you've got like the base money that's out there, which they stopped publishing the data for that like a year ago. And then they had like this other, what they call like M3 data that they stopped publishing in like 2008. I mean, I'm sure that was a big coincidence, all these dates, because what they don't want you to, if we were to pull this up on a chart, is that basically it's like a hot, it looks like, the cactus give a middle finger in the background. It's just basically straight up like the money supply is just going nuts. And so the thing is, that's like sort of the base money, but then that money can then be multiplied out, and then that person, and then it can gonna keep expanding and expanding,
Right.
expanding, expanding. And then you add in like derivatives and other things. And that's the thing, like people are like, oh, I don't want to get into crypto because I don't understand crypto. I'm like, well, you probably don't understand reverse repos and the repo market and how everything works in the traditional system either. So, it's a basically it's a high tech scam where essentially the best slave is someone that doesn't know that they are a slave. And
Right.
I'm not trying to mince words. Like, we are essentially paying interest to private banks for the privilege of being able to use their currency. And if you look on the top of a Federal Reserve note, the dollar, it says Federal Reserve note. It used to say US dollar.
Right.
There was a brief period under Kennedy where it said, I think it says like US silver notes or something like that. But it used to say redeemable in gold. And anyways, it's been hijacked. It's right in front of our faces. Most people, you're not taught this. You're not taught this if you,
Right.
You win the national freaking competition on it. And so it is, I mean, it's sort of like a gallows humor because it's very depressing when you first like understood all this stuff.
Right.
And
There
it's
is
like
some,
2009.
yeah, there's some period of time. Like, I know when I was understanding all this, I was like, it's shocking almost to the system. You have to go through this period of like unlearning all this stuff. And like you said, they don't want you to know this. Why? Because they don't want you to know the game, right? If you knew the game, you wouldn't play. Nobody would play. And so, and that's also why I wanted to talk about this today, especially about that banking piece. And we can't get into it all in this episode. So Tim has a lot of great information on his website. He has 2 podcasts we'll talk about in just a second, but start there, start looking and understanding that fractional reserve banking and understanding the Federal Reserve isn't federal. It's not reserve. These are 2 very easy things that anyone can look up, and information is out there. And these are not, this is true information. It's not conspiracy theories, right? It's not, you're the kooky one for asking these questions. These are real things. So if you can understand both of those 2 things, like you said, I think it helps get into the crypto space and understand that a little more. So let's talk about, you mentioned central bank digital currency. Let's talk about what that is and what it isn't.
So it's going to have some of the, the good features of Bitcoin, such as, it's probably going to be quick. It's going to be easy. It's going to be convenient, but it's going to have a lot of features that it's going to be tracked, traced, surveilled. And so everything you do is going to be essentially your money could be shut down by the government. And there's even this is a whole nother subject, but there's another bank that sits above the Fed called the Bank of International Settlements. It's in Basel, Switzerland. It's the central bank of the central banks, and it's its own country, sort of like the Vatican. So that way it can't be, audited. And that's a whole other fascinating subject that almost no one ever talks about. But the head of that is this 400-pound guy, Augustus Carstens. The last podcast we were joking around that he hid all the inflation by eating it because he looks like Jabba the Hutt. But he talks about how he gave a speech where he said we want the ability to block transactions. We want the ability to shut you down. And so they, we're not theorizing they want to shut us down. They're saying that they want to shut us down. And, the only thing he should be worried about is them shutting down like Big Macs or something. And so they're telling you what they want to do. And
Right.
so with this,
they always do. It's just nobody listens.
yeah, it's called vestigial magic, where they need to put out what they're going to
Yes.
do. So then that way, if you don't really object to it, it's sort of like the vampire, being invited in, if I could like make an analogy to that. But getting back to CBDCs or central bank digital currencies, basically what they're not going to like turn up the heat immediately. It's going to be like a frog boiling thing. And actually the first $1,200 CARES Act payment in May 2020, if you go back to the first text of that bill, the Maxine Waters bill actually shows that they wanted to basically have a Fed coin to give you your $1,200 back then. And so that was a trial balloon. This 40-page paper that they just came out with, that was a trial balloon. There's an Atlantic Tracker. I forgot the exact website. It's like if you type in like Atlantic Tracker CBDC, you can see they're tracking like about 90 different currency blocks that are around the world that are actively trying to either an implementation phase and research phase or an actual like hybrid testing phase or even rolled out. Like there's some Caribbean countries that already have this. And so it's not like a theory, like they're already doing this. And it's just a matter of like when and how they can trick people into accepting this. And so you've got actually the creator of the Federal Reserve System is James Warburg. And he said, we shall have a one world government. It's only a matter if it's through consent or conquest. And so they realized World War I, World War II, it's, you can't beat someone over the head and get people to, accept, the slavery to like a gun. So it's better to do it through getting people to beg for it. And so
fear,
I think
intimidation, yeah.
And so people though it's a problem reaction solution. Well, they'll come in with the solution and their solution to whatever is going on. So maybe the bond market crashes and because the dollar becomes, worth a lot less. And all of a sudden, everyone who was in bonds gets, wiped out and the government comes in and says, hey, we'll make it whole just, but it's going to be through our CBDC. And, so that's like one way that they could do that. Or it's like, hey, we're going to give, some $1,000 a month stimulus if you're a good little citizen, and we're going to give that through a CBDC. And then eventually it'll be, oh, sorry, you didn't get vaccinated. You're not getting your $1,000 a month. Or it'll be, oh, hey, we've got this separate account for you that's stacking up like $1,000 per family member per month, but you don't get it until 90% of your local neighborhood is vaccinated. And actually that was a Brookings Institute plan. So, I mean, that's actually one of the plans that they've actually come up with. And like they had their psychologists try to figure out like how to war game this to get people to accept that. So, I mean, the CBDC basically is, instead of having a dollar that's backed by that, basically it's going to be a dollar that you get through a Federal Reserve that's going to sit on your phone. But the thing is, they also want to, keep the big banks around too. So basically they're going to, shuffle this through the big banks as well. So then that way they don't cut them all out, even though the big banks own the Fed. It's pretty much the same thing at this point.
So tell us how the central bank digital currency is different from Bitcoin, Ethereum, any other type of crypto, or is it?
So Bitcoin, and one of the reasons I didn't get in super early, like $1 early, is because I had just read Creature from Jekyll Island, and I thought that blockchain was going to be used as like the mark of the beast. But this is 2010 understanding of it. I mean, so if anyone wants to criticize me, okay, what were you doing in 2010 researching Bitcoin? Yeah, probably nothing. So basically at this point, like the underlying technology of Bitcoin is the blockchain, but they're going to use that technology just like a gun can be used to, save your life or to kill somebody.
Right.
So at this point, it's like the same thing where it can be used as the most freeing thing to humanity or the thing that enslaves us the most. And so obviously the government version is going to be the enslaving version of this. And
but the government doesn't control Bitcoin. They only control the central bank digital currency, correct?
Yeah. So basically with the central bank digital currency, they can track you, trace you, surveil you, shut you down. They can and willy-nilly say, oh, hey, instead of having $5 trillion, I don't know how many dollars out in existence, but instead of having $5 trillion out in existence, we're going to have 20 trillion. They press a button and they just expand it. Whereas with Bitcoin, the code, somebody could fork Bitcoin and it's a whole nother subject and then create their own. But if no one uses it, then that goes to zero and everyone still uses the main chain. And so essentially there's enough of a consensus on there that people want the 21 million. There's only 21 million. There's not even 21 million. There's more than 21 million millionaires in the world. So there's not even enough for every millionaire to have one. And at some point, I think the currency is going to break down. And, whether it's tomorrow or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, I think on a long enough time horizon, it's, pretty much a done deal that, whoever is the world reserve currency, that's not the situation forever. I mean, in Klaus Schwab's COVID-19, the Great Reset, and I, recommend people go and, learn who Klaus Schwab is. I mean, this was his book right here. And I think it's on page 72. He talks about like the sub chapter title is called something like the fate of the US dollar and how it's a great privilege for the dollar to be the reserve currency and how we're abusing that and how it's not fair to the rest of the world. And it's really not. from a purely objective standpoint, that we get to print all this money and have our inflation go overseas and not really, I mean, obviously now we're getting the inflation that's just now starting to come back. And according to Joe Biden, the best way to get that under control is to pass like a $3 trillion Build Back Better plan to borrow more money that we don't have to help out with the inflation is, pretty much their grand plan, which means there is no plan. And it's different from Bitcoin, that the network controls Bitcoin. There's no way that they can stop me sending something to you, but they could stop, essentially like digital currency from being sent. But then you can get into, there's going to be ways where they bamboozle Bitcoin too, because there's these like second layers, like the Lightning Network, and eventually that will become a bank, and then they'll probably end up getting people there. Or if you use like Bitcoin through like PayPal app, that's like a third layer where PayPal could shut you down. And that's getting probably outside the scope of like conversation of getting into like Lightning and stuff. But essentially Bitcoin is decentralized. It can't be shut down, the network, whereas this CBDC can be shut down, or you can be shut down. And they can also inflate it, with a flick of a wrist, just, have 10 times the supply of units. And they can also just take your money too. So, oh, hey, we think you owe this much on your taxes, or we're going to have a negative interest rate, or they're going to have it. And we have an episode that was titled, I think, Digital Programmable Weaponized Money. And so what they're doing in China is they were, I always feel like they need to say like in a Trump voice, like China. What we're doing in China is to, they're having their stimulus right now. They're giving their people like $30. I think they gave them $30 and the opportunity to win free laundry for a year. So, I mean, people are selling themselves out for free laundry and $30 in China to get their version of the central bank digital currency. And they've also talked about trying to put like expiration dates on the money that they get. So then that way, hey, we're giving the stimulus, it expires in, 3 months. So then they force people to then get it out into the economy. So that's another potentiality, because with Bitcoin, it's programmable money. And so, obviously it's then be programmed and weaponized against us. And that's why I called it programmable weaponized money in the podcast. And that's probably, if they can do it, they are going to do it. And so, but if this will start off, frog boiling. So they're not going, they're not going to, tomorrow. They want to suck just like YouTube, it sucks everybody in, or Facebook, and oh, it's free and commons, and you guys can say whatever you want as long as you're not making like terroristic threats or anything. And then they get you all sucked in. And then, all of a sudden, if you start talking, against the narrative, then they kick you off. So I've been kicked off YouTube, kicked off Facebook.
Around that. And like, as you were in that situation and you got kicked off. And so let's just touch briefly on that, because your background, your opinions, the fact that you will say your opinions is, like I said, your website says, congratulations on finding one of the only financial advisors that has taken the red pill. I mean, immediately I was like, hell yes, I got to talk to this guy. But your opinions and your thoughts are so different than mainstream, other mainstream advisors. So, and I understand that from what happened to you back in 2018, this caused some problems for you. So can you share a little bit about that with us, about what you went through and how you ended up on the other side?
Yeah. So after basically getting shadow banned off Facebook in 2016, November 16th, 2016, and this sounds ridiculous, but I had a fake news list go viral 2.5 months before Trump used that term. And then I had one person by name on that list, and it was Paul Krugman. And then, and I'm a libertarian anarchist voluntarist. Like, I don't care about Trump, so it's not like about him. But then I listed one person by name, and that was Paul Krugman. And half later, he won Trump's award for most fake news. But I had a meme, it was just called fake news list. And so basically, I'm claiming to be the first one to throw it back at the left. And that's a whole nother story. I'm not the first person to ever throw those two words together, but they didn't like that. And so I went from reaching millions of people a week off like a standstill. I mean, I grew a huge page in 2 months, and then they shut me down from there. And then I got shut down from World Alternative Media's YouTube page. And then I was on We Are Change. And then we got demonetized over there with 700,000 subscribers. So, I mean, I know. And so this then led me more into blockchain once I realized, hey, with Ethereum, you can build these applications on top of blockchain that can't be shut down. And so then that got me interested in the space, was actually more so with Ethereum than even Bitcoin, because of the fact that I realized you could do more than just, send fake money back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm like dipping my toes in, and then, come August 2017, one of my friends who, was a very early adopter of Bitcoin, said, hey, we got a bunch of rich crypto people here. And this is when Bitcoin's like $3,000. And, how do they get their money out of Bitcoin if they want to, hey, they put in 5,000 and now they've got 10 million. Like, how do you take 2 million off the table, not get killed in taxes? And so I came up with different charitable giving strategies, charitable remainder trust, where you can donate Bitcoin, but then the money gets paid to you while you're alive, and upon your death, it goes to charity. And if you're in the right situation where if your assets have low enough cost basis and you're old enough and things work out, you actually can make out you basically get more money by giving your money away than if you don't give your money away. And that's why all the super elite give their money away. So, I mean, it's not because of how the tax code is written. So I brought that to crypto, and then people started asking me about crypto IRAs, right around the same time, since 2017. And then all of a sudden, and then I'm working on this, and all of a sudden, like 2 months later, Bitcoin goes through the roof, and all of a sudden it was on everyone's radar. And then come like January 2018, I was already set to go speak at Acapulco. I've been already doing this before it was like the in vogue thing. And I would actually,
what's that event?
It's called Acapulco. Is a like the biggest sort of like anarchist, voluntarist crypto event, like there is, and they get basically 2,000 people like me on the beach in Acapulco, Mexico, which supposedly is the fourth most dangerous city in the world. And it's like probably like the time of my life every year I went there. But this year I'm not going because I didn't want to wear a mask. And like last year I didn't go because they didn't really have it last year. They did, but there was I went to a satellite event last year. So it's unfortunate because of how it used to be. I mean, that will probably never really get created again. But you'd have like Dr. Ron Paul was there, and G. Edward Griffin was there, and Mike Maloney, which I recommend people check out his Hidden Secrets of Money series on YouTube. And actually, both of those guys are backstage right before I had to go talk. So I had never talked in front of a big crowd before, and here there's like gonna be 500 people there, a lot of crypto, millionaires and potentially billionaires there. I mean, Roger Ver, crypto. Bitcoin Jesus was there. I mean, it was like a who's who of like everyone at this thing. And Jeff Berwick's the one that puts it on. And basically right before I was about to go speak there, the company I was with, LPL Financial, banned every advisor in America. And I was not their employee. They're sort of like the bank that was holding on the client money. And then they said I wasn't allowed to, or nobody was allowed to talk about Bitcoin, which then, and like you weren't allowed to talk about Bitcoin, think about Bitcoin, recommend Bitcoin. Like you just had to pretend it didn't exist. And so I'm like, you guys are idiots. This is like where everything is going. So I'm like, well, fine. So I had to pay a big fine to get out of a contract. Then the state of it, then give up my Series 7 license. And then I gave the speech. Then I was going to try to get with the current outfit I'm at now, Innovative Advisory Group, get on board here. But then the state of Arizona took forever to approve like my transfer paperwork. Like literally took between like I did this in February and didn't get on board until like October, had zero income. Bitcoin and Ethereum also had crashed down. So, I didn't really have a lot of money saved up because the early years of the financial advisor is like not really easy. I started in 2008. Then I moved across country where I didn't know anybody. So I basically had to start over. Then I built things up in 2015. And then at pretty much the earliest point I could, jumped to go independent. And that was going to take about 3 years to sort of pay off. And it started like to pay off. And as I like hit the point where I was actually like made money for the first time, then I lost my job. And then that ended up like causing me to like lose my house and like end up getting like divorced and now I'm like super like things are going really well now, but like I had to go through all this crap to get there.
Why I wanted to bring this up was your story is so you didn't fold. It would have been easy not to go on stage and give that presentation, right? It would have been easy to be like, all right, fine, I'm going to shut it all down in the sake of comfort, but you didn't do that. And that's why I wanted to tell this part of your story, because I think it's amazing. I think it's inspiring. I think anybody that's listening is maybe in this, especially with what people are going through now with their jobs, with, having to get vaccine or not, and, keep the job, whatever. You have the story to tell where you stood your ground and it sucked and you went through a lot of shit, but you came out on the other side and look how you're doing now. I mean, you never stopped talking about what you believed, and that is so critical and so important. Like what you hear so far? Take what you've learned and invest in yourself with the Create What You Speak Academy. Visit createwhatyouspeak.com to learn more. Now back to the show.
And actually, so I had a really nice like corner office, like across from like the Ferrari dealership and like a super like a nice part of Scottsdale. And then I had to give that up. And then it ended up being like fortuitous, because then, now I would have been paying on something where you couldn't even go to the office for like, like a year and a half type deal. And then that forced me to actually go Zoom only in 2018. And so I was using Zoom, decent amount in 2015. And then on the website, if you go to schedule now, it says like what Zoom is. And then people are like, well, everyone knows what Zoom is. I'm like, well, they didn't in, 2018.
Right.
And so the best part of this whole pandemic is that I never had to tell anybody what Zoom was ever again. And so I had already gone virtual, then decided to, instead of trying to do like the normal thing where I'm out like networking, and I guess now you can't, you're not shaking hands, kissing babies anymore. I guess that's frowned upon, but
exactly.
in this coronavirus age. But the normal financial advisor thing, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go try to find people that are like me. Who knows how many of them there are. I think there's probably a lot, but everyone's just too afraid to say it. Right. And my grandpa's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and you should and then my dad, same thing. He's like, wait a minute. It's like, he's like, so let me get this straight. It's like, your marketing plan is basically to only work with libertarians. I'm like, well, not quite, but he's like, but not any libertarians, like the ones that are more hardcore like you. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. And he's like, and they have to be in the crypto. I'm like, well, they don't have to be, but that helps. He's like, that's the dumbest effing thing I've ever heard. And then like
Look
literally
now, Dad, right?
and then probably like that week I bought put options at the S&P 500, like right before everything crashed in 2020. So I ended up working out pretty well. And then, like 2 months later, I like show him like what my pay stub was for that month. And he's like, we don't have to be such a, a-hole about this. I'm like, well, you're literally telling me not to stop what I'm doing, like right as I'm at the he's like, well, my friend Gary's a cop and he won't work with you because he sees the stuff you post on Facebook. And I'm like, well, good. I don't work with cops anyway.
My customer. So. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm not trying to, go have Gary like me. I'm like, I'm trying to go one niche thing of what I want to do. And then people around the country are then going to find me if they resonate with that. And if they don't, and I try to literally be off-putting someone going to a website, putting the red pill thing there, because if they're offended by that, then I don't have to waste my time. Like, I'm not trying to change myself to get them to like me. Like, I'm qualifying them to get them in the door, not the other way around. So
exactly. And I love that philosophy. I love that approach, and that again, it's not folding over to the main. And that's again why I want to talk about this, because I want people to see that this can be done. You've done it. You did it. You went through the shit. You lost your license for a period of time, right? You had all this stuff happen, and you had these moments where you had a choice where you could go back, and I know you had a family then, you have kids, and so that I'm sure was even more played into it, but you still stuck by
a 1 and 2 year old at home at the time,
right?
So and a wife that wasn't working, so
these things that are crumbling down. So it's an inspiring story, and I love it. And the resolve that you have about it, the fact that, and our families are always like our worst critics, right? We have these ideas and they're the ones that want to shoot it down. And they're the ones that are the voice that we hear when we have those bad days. Right. But if you believe in something, if you stand for it, if you choose that this is how my life's going to go, then that's what happens. And I think it's an amazing story. I love it.
Yeah, and technically I didn't lose my license. So I gave up a Series 7, which then operates in this like broker dealer world. And then because I didn't realize when you're 22 and coming into the business, and most people who are advisors today like don't even know this stuff, but I didn't realize like you didn't even have to have a 7. And then if you're operating in this fee-based or fee-only type world, then you don't, on the RIA side of things, like you don't even have to have a 7. You can operate underneath either like a 65 or a 66. So I still operate underneath the 66. I just voluntarily gave up my 7, so I didn't lose it, or they didn't I was never but I was never like reprimanded. I never had like any marks on the U4 or anything, which is even more crazy that they wouldn't approve it after I had never had any complaints, the fact that I never had any complaints, and all the stuff and political stuff and all the crazy stuff I put out there, and in this hyper politicized world, like you definitely would get some complaints, and I haven't had any, and they still came down on me pretty hard. But it made me more resilient, because then the whole pandemic happened. I was already doing things through Zoom. I was already getting clients virtually. I was already working from home. And then the whole stigma became like, it used to be a stigma. Oh, you're a financial advisor working from home, and how you try to, dance around that. And then all of a sudden it became like everyone's working from home, and everyone's scrambling to try to find Zoom.
If you go into an office now, then it's like, why would the person why does the person want to go in the office? Like, like that's such a weird thing, I think.
And I took out domains for like virtual financial planner. Actually, I took out domains for Bitcoin financial planner, but like all like 80 of them, so, I mean, I'm forgetting some right now, but like a crypto wealth advisor, but like virtual financial advisor, what's the other one? Robo Financial Planner. Like I took out all these back then because I realized I'm like, this is stupid that I'm driving like 40 minutes into town to Scottsdale. And Phoenix is so huge that even if you're in the greater Phoenix area, it could take, over an hour sometimes just to get to where you're going because it's so huge or more. So now that's like you're burning an hour one way, an hour another way.
Yeah. Waste of
And
time
it's
and
just,
energy and
and
all
it's
of
even the
these.
client's time too. Like their time is valuable.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people times that have like either phone meetings or Zoom meetings anyways. And then now I'm almost at the point where like the traditional financial planning model, it's all going to be irrelevant. And like, I mean, it's good to like be doing plans. And I came from that world of doing plans of people, but to say, oh, hey, we're going to invest in this. We're going to go up, 8% per year and we're going to do this. I mean, it's not going to matter when the currency eventually crashes and they have a reset of the dollar. It's not like all of your assumptions and everything are go out the window. And so I think it's more important to have like your asset allocation of, throwing things in like, gold and silver and crypto and, doing, the equity portion of that, if you want to, in a somewhat smart manner. Cause we're at the inflection point now where in 2 months from now, the Fed's going to stop printing money, start raising rates. They said they're going to raise rates 3 times this year, 3 times next year. We'll see what they say today, but there's no way that's going to happen. Some of the banks think they're going to raise rates 8 times. And the thing is, even if they do raise rates 8 times, okay, great. You've got what, a 2.5% Fed funds rate when inflation's 7. Okay, you're still losing all this money per year. It's not going to stop it. And the only thing they can do is take the air out of this bubble to the crash to market, or they've got to just accept higher inflation. And so they'll probably just accept higher inflation, make everyone get, poorer and poorer and poorer, death to the thumb, pricks over here, paper cuts. And people aren't smart enough to realize, maybe not your audience, but just everyone in general, you were to tax somebody an extra 7% that, but all of a sudden, if everything costs 7% more, they don't necessarily blame the government policies on that. They might blame whoever's in charge, Brandon, or they blame Jerome Powell, but they're not going to, blame the fact that this whole system was based predatory system that was ultimately designed to fail. And I shouldn't even say fail, because it's done its job where the central bank owns vast swaths of homes, and they never had the money to begin with. And now they're like the largest mortgage owner, and they never had the money to begin with. And then it gets even more corrupt. So if you go back to 2020, this company BlackRock, they ended up taking their junk bond fund and then literally like selling it to the Fed at 100 cents on the dollar as they were the brokers. So they got paid a broker commission to offload literally their junk bond Federal Reserve. Other companies got to offload their junk to the Fed and get bailed out. And then, no surprise that, a few months before that, they as in BlackRock gave a speech at Jackson Hole in August 2019 saying what the Fed would need to do during the next crisis. And then lo and behold, they do those recommendations on the freaking paper and speech that they gave. And so, and then there's, it's just so many different, like, because the economy was about to go down in September 2019. There's this whole repo crisis going on and like $1 trillion a day. I mean, the system was on the brink of implosion in September of 2019. And then I think a lot of what happened with the pandemic was basically like a financial cover up that went on, where they were able to then get all this bad stuff off their balance sheet, shore things up for another few years, like increase the money supply by 80% of all the money that's ever been printed in 2 years. And everyone's eye was over here on the pandemic. No one's eye was over here at the Fed. And people just don't realize like how much the system was on the brink in September of 2019. Because they're watching football or they're doing something else. But I mean, the system was about to completely melt down, and then it got saved by all these extraordinary measures.
Right. And so I know we're coming up on time here. So let's talk a little bit before we wrap up about your podcast and how people can find those, because I know there's so many things we talked about here that could be hours and hours of conversation. I know your podcast, you've talked about a lot of this, and those are things that people can go back and listen to. So why don't you tell us about those?
Yeah, so I run a LibertyAdvisor show. I mean, a lot of times they're just talking about different things that I think are, important. I mean, a lot of financial subjects. I mean, it's mainly, I'd say, more financial oriented, but then, I'll get into these other, little rabbit trails. And then I have a Tim and John show, which is my partner, John Snyson, which that is more of like a higher level financial geek show. So it's probably not necessarily like the intro show you'd want to start off in, because he's even like a bigger than I am. And so we were both part of World Alternative Media, and then we got kicked off YouTube in October of 2020. So you're not allowed to be putting out too much truth on there. But it started off as I would make a bunch of like wild claims, and then I would like say this stuff, but then I didn't like really have the proof besides like Facebook posts, but now I'm not even on Facebook. So I made a bunch of wild claims, and I was like, I just want to have like a record that this was out there. So before I even started the podcast, I had like a kind of like a little vlog series I did for a few months before the 2016 election. And I predicted, and this sounds nuts, but I predicted Trump was going to win, and they blame it on the Russians. And this is why they're going to blame it on the Russians in September of 2016. And then at Anarchapulco in February 2020, and I did this a bunch of other times on the podcast. I just don't have like the research crew to go back and dig all this stuff, but I had been saying pretty much all along that they were, and I had a PowerPoint with 6 states on the PowerPoint saying that they're going to take these 6 states through the voting machines in 1 or 2 counties in the states. They're going to rig them. There's a whole bunch of ways they're going to do it, and this is why they're going to do it. And Trump's going to lose. Now, I thought he was going to lose to Pete Buttigieg, not to Joe Biden, but I don't know else that said that Trump was going to win in 2016, and they're going to blame it on the Russians, and then also say he's going to lose in 2020, and it's going to be because of the voting machines, and there's fraction magic, and that's a whole nother subject of how they can like basically steal the votes, and that's just one of many ways. And the thing is, I voted right in Kanye West. Like I knew the whole thing is a joke, and I wanted to piss off everybody. I'm like, all right, I'll piss off all my friends that don't vote because I voted. I'll piss off the libertarians because I was a delegate for them and didn't even vote for them. I'll piss off the obviously the Democrats and Republicans, but it's just a show like this whole thing is a joke, and that you're better off taking care of yourself and your family, getting yourself prepared, because if you put all of your weight and energy into, puppet's going to rule me better. Like I had high hopes for Trump, and then he went and immediately picked Paul as his Fed chair. And that was basically the day that I got off the Trump train immediately. And then Joe Biden picks the same guy. I mean, so that's all you need to know is that literally first Obama picked him to be on the board of governors. Then Trump picked him, and then Biden picked the same guy. And so that's the guy that's really running things, not the president. The president doesn't run jack. And so as soon as Trump picked Powell, I'm like, he's obviously out. There's, because people think that he's like, he knows everything about everything, and he knows everything about everything. But, apparently, he didn't understand the depths of how corrupt and how swampy the swamp was. And he just, filled up more swamp, in that. And that's, I'm sure this conversation is pissing off some people right now. But the thing is, he then went on to say picking Jerome Powell was the worst decision he ever made. And so I got a lot of crap from the Trump people for that. But, but the Trump people, if they had realized what I realized, and realized that this guy was, basically a Janet Yellen clone, and Trump hated Janet Yellen, but yet now he picks basically the male version of her. Like, I don't know what anybody was thinking. And so it's just any time spent, in politics is basically wasted. I mean, I guess at the local level, it's not, but like, oh, wow, this guy is going to do. And I think, if Trump couldn't do it, I mean, what other,
well,
puppet?
And then it comes back to what you just said, though. You're better off taking care of yourself and your family, because when you put your hope in anything outside of yourself, politicians, religion, whatever it is, you're expecting an external savior to come in and save the day for you. And that's not, if 2020 didn't show us that, I mean, so putting your energy into these things outside of yourself, to me, is not worth the time or the effort. And again, that's why I want to have these types of conversations, to help people understand that, there's other things going on, and it's worth your time to investigate it and look into it and find out this information, because it's not something that you don't have to understand every little piece of it, but understanding the high level enough to see what's really going on helps you make different decisions. It helps you do things like you're saying, protect yourself, protect your family, think outside of the box a little, and don't just listen to everybody on Facebook saying Bitcoin's bad, or, this is good, right? Central bank digital currency is good. Look into it, figure it out for yourself, and see what's right for you. And we have to stop putting these external politicians, musicians, actors, whoever, on the pedestal and acting like they're going to come in and save the day. No, you are the one that's responsible for saving your own day. That's the bottom line. So Tim, I want to thank you for having you on the show this week. We could talk for hours, I know, but we're coming up on the hour here. So I want to make sure that we have a few minutes to close out here. Let's wrap up I want to ask you 2 things. Usually I ask, my listener or the guests that I have, what's one piece of advice they would give the listeners? And I want to ask you that for 2 parts. So what's one piece of advice you leave the listeners with, really about staying true to themselves in building their, their lifestyle, whatever that is for them. And then also the second part of that is, what's one piece of advice you would offer the listeners about the crypto space and building wealth based on our conversation today?
Yeah, I say for the crypto space, I mean, first you want to, do your own research and not just take anybody's word for it, but you also want to make sure you don't get, involved in different scams. And people, they want to get into it for the first time and they're not happy with Bitcoin because, they wanted to find the next Bitcoin. Well, the next Bitcoin is Bitcoin, and you can, dabble in these other smaller ones, but the people want to go from, hey, what's the cheapest one that I can buy the most of, and they don't realize that some of them have like a quadrillion or 100 billion versus. And so the price, if you compare price to price, it's not apples to apples. So that's one thing I'd recommend people look into or be aware of. And then also the best time to buy is when others are fearful, and then you want to be fearful when others are buying. It's a Warren Buffett quote. And so right now there is something called a fear and greed index. You can, DuckDuckGo that, search engine that. You shouldn't be using Google, but you can go search engine that, and you'll find that yesterday we're at a 12. And so anytime, right now it's at a 23, which
What's
is
it
still
called
extreme.
again?
It's called the fear and greed index.
Fear and greed index.
And so right now the fear and greed index is showing a 23. That's extreme fear. So basically, if you're at 100, that's extreme euphoria. 0 is basically Bitcoin's dead. And the best time, there pretty much has not been a bad time to buy when Bitcoin's been at like a 12 fear and greed. So I was in for my clients the past 2 days when we were down in the low teens or even below the teens, like a 12, buying more Bitcoin because you want to basically do the opposite of what everybody else is doing. And so I'm not saying that this is the exact bottom or that I can't go a little bit lower, but you want to, because everyone always complains when it's high, oh, I wish I bought Bitcoin when it's lower. Then Bitcoin's lower, and they're like, oh, I'm glad I didn't buy Bitcoin because it's crashing. And so there's some people out there like Peter Schiff, who's a kind of like a famous like libertarian economist guy, and I made a video compilation of him where he's like, oh, Bitcoin crashed on a 75, it crashed on a 150, it crashed down to 300, crashed down to 1,000, crashed on to 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. So, I mean, he's been talking about it crashing ever since it was at like $70, but yet now it's, crashed and still, like, as we're filming this, like about 38,000. And so, you want to be stacking crypto, and using these opportunities to get into it more. But first, you want to do your own research. You got to realize why you're in it. And if you're in it to make a quick buck and you don't really care about the underlying philosophical reasons, then a lot of those people got washed out. Half the people that came into the space came in last year. A lot of them panicked, and they're panicking to the stronger hands. And then we keep building stronger foundations, and over a long timeline, the Fed's going to keep printing money. They're pretending that they're not right now, but they have a long track record of lying and saying and not doing things they said they're going to do. And then on the saying true to yourself thing, I mean, at this point, you can do the traditional thing, work for one employer, but I mean, they can go and fire you, willy-nilly in 2 seconds. And so, in this day and age, you should be, taking, extra time you have, and then figure, whether it's researching how to sell things online or how to build different types of niches, or what are you passionate about, and try to figure out what you're passionate about, and then how to make money from that, and then do your main thing while then doing a little bit over here. And then eventually the little bit over here becomes the main thing. Right. And then you can, sort of check out from the main system. And there's plenty of ways to do that online today. I mean, it just sort of depends what someone is interested in. And the people who are going to put you down the most are the people who are going to be closest to you. So It's going to be obviously like your parents and your maybe your closest friends are going to be the ones to try to shoot you down. And it's not going to be easy. And I mean, it might be easy, but I mean, luckily, hopefully it is. But if it's going to be anything that's worth fighting for is usually going to be hard, and you got to have this mentality and not have a get down on yourself, because I could have got incredibly down on myself. I mean, basically my business exploded in 2020, and I started off. And literally the day before quarantine, my wife and I decided to get a divorce. Like the day I couldn't think, and then the house that I was in, I was renting, and then the very next day, the homeowner goes, "Oh, by the way, we're selling your home." So the plan was I was going to stay there. So then I had to move. It's like I had every pity party excuse if I didn't want to go do something to wallow down and not do anything. And I decided to take that time and double down. And like I taught myself, and this is years ago, like video editing, and taught myself some podcasting stuff, and taught myself. And so people are wasting time online doing looking up cat memes or doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And I got off Facebook too. And I was on in 2004, like a super early adopter on Facebook. And then I realized, I don't want to give my time and attention. Like they're making money off my attention. I'm paying them attention. And so, they can't make money off me if I'm not on there. And actually, I still have one page on there that still sometimes reaches like a bunch of people, even though I'm not even on there, even doing anything. So I'm still able to troll with not even being on there. But yeah, it's been over a year now, and it's been probably the most productive year I've ever had. And I was super addicted to it. And so it was sort of like my crack. And now I was able to break away from that addiction. And for a lot of people, it is an addiction. It is hard to break, and they're keeping everybody in echo chambers. But I think it is possible in this day and age to, there's so much great information. I mean, one thing you don't do is don't go out to a school and go spend $50,000 a year or more to have some, have some marketing teacher that knows nothing teach you about this stuff. You could take, if you want to, like social media marketing, you can, watch people like Gary Vaynerchuk. And the first time I heard his name is somebody goes, you remind me of Gary V. And I'm like, who the fuck is Gary V? They're like, that's exactly what he would say. And so so then I started paying attention to him. And then like Grant Cardone he has a Cardone University, I think was really, really good for, people that want to know, more about like marketing and really sort of like helping like close deals. And so there's people who are experts who have courses, and like trying to find those experts, and, teaching yourself is the best thing you can do. And then trying to figure out some sort of plan to do something that actually fulfills you, because it's only a matter of time, and they're coming for everybody, especially if you're not vaccinated. And so it's good being in a spot where you can control your own destiny, I think, is what I'll leave people with.
I totally agree. That's just an excellent way to put it. Tim, again, I want to thank you so much for joining me this week. This has been I just love this conversation. So can you tell the listeners a little bit more about how they can find you, your website, and how they can work with you?
Yeah, actually, I think it's under construction right this second, but I know, but if you do, it's LibertyAdvisor.com is the best place you guys can go to. It's the Liberty Advisor, because someone already took Liberty Advisor. So the Liberty Advisor, that's with an OR at the end. And then from there, there's like a media tab that you guys can click on, and then that shows all the places you can find me on, like an Odysee channel, Bitchute, all the audio podcasts and iTunes and other places you'd find people. So it's audio and video. And it's mainly on big financial topics that are of the day. And I've had lots of important interviews, and I've like interviewed Dr. Judy Mikovits, who started Plandemic, and Gia Griffin a bunch of times. And it's, I just try to help people out by giving them understanding what I think is going on from all my research. And, people either like it or they don't like it, but, I'm trying to do things the hard way by, talking about economics, and then also, not taking the Trump route, because could have gotten really popular if I just stuck with that. Right. But I'm trying to do things the hard way, but I'm doing it my way. So, I'd rather be doing it my way and be smaller than, be bigger and be more on the radar, because you get more, right? You get problems being on the radar too. So,
yeah, that's true. And so if people want to work with you, is there information on your website to get scheduled and that? And what is your typical client? I guess I didn't ask that. Maybe we could close with that.
Typical client would be someone that resonated with anything I just said right now. So, a lot of times are people who are distrust. They're either coming from people who already made a bunch of money in Bitcoin and want to figure out how to get out of it, or they want to start getting some crypto into their IRA, or they're basically people that, have been red pilled, so to speak, and they are sick of getting cookie cutter 60-40 portfolios from everybody else, and having their advisors thinking they're crazy because they're talking about, Jekyll Island or something, or the Fed. And so those are pretty much the avatars of almost all of my clients, especially all the new ones at this point. And, you don't have to have crypto, working with me, but, I do recommend it, because I, personally think that that's, where things are going, along with gold and silver. But, there's, sort of many ways to get to the same place. And so my, avatar is basically anybody that resonate with what's saying here. And for those who don't resonate, luckily for you, 99% of the other advisors are all the same, doing the same thing. So, there's no shortage of them for you guys to go to. So
yeah, awesome. Well, again, Tim, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, Sloane, for having me. Pleasure to be on.
Yep. And I'll link to all his, to the website and everything in the show notes. You've been listening to the Create What You Speak podcast, brought to you by webtalkradio.net. You can hear the podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting platform. I'm Sloane Freemont, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode of the Create What You Speak podcast, where we will continue to free our minds and learn how we can live free in an unfree world. Check out my website, sloanefremont.com, to learn more.